Welcome to Matters of Decorum. I'm Scott Corum. This is what matters to me. Couple of changes. Microphones in a different place. Facilitate more recording in the office for a project coming up. And a little bit more natural light today. It's a nice day today. I'm also not recording this the night before, but recording it the day of because this took some thought. This topic was suggested by a long-time supporter. Hi, Sadi. And it regards a specific type of non-player character, or NPC, that being the companion. I devoted a lot of writing time and books to having availability of companions in the victory system, and even back in the old Hot Chicks game, Biosex Nihilum, Creating Life, and then the Thralls of Victory and Prosthetica. Beasts of Victory has a lot of material in it specifically for creating familiars or training animals to be pets or companions or mounts or what have you. And Thralls of Victory creating companions. Either through magic, magically created beings, temporary or permanent, or homunculi or golems, or robots, androids, gynoids. Either making something that can be your companion, or taking an existing being and training it or adapting it to be your companion. There are two different perspectives I have on these things. First, my perspective as from a sheerly mechanical and technical point of view as a game master. That for as long as there have been, Dungeons and Dragons has familiars and special mounts for warlocks, wizards, paladins have their special mounts. So you've got this companion. In the case of familiars, companions that are linked to the character, giving them additional abilities and extending their sensory range. Being able to see through the eyes of the animal. Have you ever seen the movie Beastmaster? It's kind of that idea, just a little bit more specific. As a game master, I ran a game. I talked about the Shattered Earth playtest that the whole VDead story came from. I was introducing animals into the system and seeing how that worked, and someone bought an animal to have as their pet. And then everyone at the table, oh, can I go find a this? Can I go find a that? Because, of course, everyone had. And the next two game sessions were 30% the phrase, and what does my pet do? Because adding a big pile of companions to the table means that the game master now has to play not only everything else in the universe, but has to specifically be concerned with what everyone's extra action is because they've got an animal taking it. And that's super annoying. Which can be easily solved by people taking charge of their own damn animals. And then I command my lion to do this. Then I command my hawk to do that. So that takes care of it. But, oh, is my hawk helping out? What's my hawk doing? Don't do that to your game master. They're really busy already. And then I have to get to some the thoughts from a different perspective, which is the morality of companions. Humans domesticated animals a long time ago. And in some cases, animals domesticated us. That is the difference between dogs and cats. And it is a symbiotic relationship. Much more so back in the day when wolves could be fed a bit of the kill and then would assist in defense and on the kill, on the hunt, and then having them help mind some of the herds and breeding them for qualities which were more beneficial or more desirable over time, leading to all the breeds of dogs we have now. And that's not something whose morality I'm going to question. Those are an animal that gains something from their relationship to us, and we gain something from our relationship to them. I know some people who deal with dogs professionally. Hi, Gina. And those are wonderful relationships in real life. They can go south just like any relationship in real life can, but for the most part, a dog is going to give you pretty much unconditional love, and you tend to return that. A dog can help you in many ways. Dogs can be trained to be service animals, and for people who have disabilities, to help them compensate. And that's an amazing thing. Reflecting that in a role-playing game is rewarding and good reflection of real life. My dog, or my character can't walk, but I've got a service dog who runs and grabs me things and can help pull me along. Former sled dog with special training. That's not so much a problem. Let's talk about familiars, though. Different games treat familiars as being different. The familiar based on the practice of witchcraft, in which will have an animal that they link to, often a cat, that is assisting them in rituals and in their relationship to the supernatural. More in the mythology of witchcraft. I know some actual witches too. Not going to name any names. In role-playing games, this has been expanded and quantified, so that your ritual animal, your familiar, gives you special gifts, gives you access to their senses, so that you can use them to scout around, and in many cases links the life force of the spellcaster to the familiar, so that if the familiar is injured, the spellcaster feels it. If the familiar is killed, the spellcaster loses some of their own life. And this is, wrote the rules for that in Victory. That's not a bad thing. Again, we have a symbiotic relationship here. A very closely metaphysical symbiotic relationship. Then I took those concepts a little bit further, conceptually. Being able to cybernetically augment an animal's intellect. Being able to uplift an animal and give it the capacity for language and manipulation, cybernetic thumbs, as it were. And now we have a being capable of independent thought, and ideally capable of independent motivation. Some animals are theoretically already capable of that, more of them than we are thinking every day. We've known dolphins have something akin to our intellect. Octopi, even though they have a much smaller brain mass, it is a optimized and unusual brain mass, and they are capable of tool use and greater problem solving than we had given them credit for. Crows are capable of tool use and greater problem solving than we have given them credit for. They have greater language skills than we had thought. They've got long-lasting memories, can learn much quicker than we thought, and can hold grudges for years. Does that mean crows are intelligent? I don't know. Intelligence. Sapience. That's a line. There are some tests that we have thrown down from time to time for what is intelligence, what is sapience, what is that unique quality that makes mankind a thinking, self-motivating being and everything else an animal. We solve problems through step-by-step analysis of the problem. We can use tools to solve our problems. We can communicate with one another so that we can communally solve our problems. We are aware of ourself as a self. We can use the word I in a sentence. I think this. I do that. And that I is a concept. That is our consciousness. But other things don't have that. We thought. That consciousness is a line. That is a line in the sand. When you take a creature or a being or a construct that doesn't have consciousness and bend it to your will and use it as you choose, well, that's property. If you do something untoward to someone else's pet, you are usually guilty of property damage. Our pets are considered property when they are stolen. They're handled like stolen property. That's what society and the law treats our animal companions as. If animals could think abstractly, if animals had a self-concept, if animals had consciousness, there might be some problems, because then they might not want to be our pets. This gets into fuzzy areas really fast, because our grasp on consciousness is tenuous. We know what physical, biological properties exist up here, and our thought processes don't just rest up here. You ever get a gut feeling? Literally, a feeling right about here that something wasn't right. We have a big nerve plexus here, the solar plexus, and it has neural activity as well. And it's a fairly common bit of everyday knowledge that guys often think with a brain below their waist. There's a nerve plexus there, and I will tell you from some experience, some of my worst decisions have come from down south. We are complicated beings. Uploading someone's consciousness into a machine is a dream, one of mine. I mean, I really hope that becomes a viable thing one of these days, but we don't understand consciousness. Not to the degree that we need to. It is a question mark. What makes this work as consciousness? But something else with a brain that is this size or larger doesn't. Elephants aren't conscious. Are they? Twice my brain mass, easily. But that's just for running a larger body, right? Dinosaurs had far less neural mass than this. We don't know where the line lies, but it's a very important line. And as far as my philosophy is concerned, that line is consent. I am a conscious, living, thinking being. I have attained a certain amount of experience in this world that is most basely measured by how long I have been here, I can give consent. I can withhold consent. I can make that choice. Someone who has this equipment is self-aware, can perceive the world as the world, can make that simulation of everything out there in here to make decisions based off of, but who has not been around for long enough to have gained the experience necessary to understand the consequences of their actions to themselves and others, can't legally give consent. Too young. The line at which that happens varies by your geographic location, by your principality, by the laws governing your community, but in general, past a certain point, your consciousness plus your experience measured in your age equals consent. That is what people have. Animals can neither give nor withhold consent. They are not considered to have consciousness. They are not considered to have the ability to fully understand consequences to themselves and others. They don't have understanding. They can't give consent at any age. They are not equipped to give consent at any age. To some people, this means we must protect them from their inability to give or withhold consent. To other people, this means we have tacit permission to do what we want to with these animals because they can neither give nor withhold consent. This is the circus controversy. Training animals through often cruel and painful techniques. Circus animals, elephants, bears, lions, tigers, oh my. As society sees that those animals who do not have consent are being treated in ways that we wouldn't want to see animals that we like are treated, the voices that say because they cannot give nor withhold consent, they should be protected. Ringling Brothers isn't a thing anymore. Because of the conflict between those voices and the voices arguing for protection rather than usage, have won out for the moment. For the moment. Times and people change. Pain and cruelty don't change, but how people perceive them do. So, animal companions. Under a point, they are incapable of consent. You can take a horse and train it to do as you wish because you can buy a horse. It is property, neither capable of giving nor withholding consent. The horse might not want to do something, but making the horse do what you want the horse to do is training. And you can't really define what a horse wants because that's almost a process of consciousness. The horse can't really want something, can't want to be running around free in a field. Horses wouldn't exist as they do if it weren't for mankind's domestication, so those are property. They can't give consent. If I want a horse to sit under me while I ride on it, I train a horse to do that, the horse is going to do that. If it doesn't do that, the horse is broken and needs to be trained more or traded out for another one. No telling what happens to the horse that I traded out that wouldn't do what I wanted it to do, but that's not my problem anymore. I sold off a problem animal. How you feel about that statement defines how you want to use companions in a role-playing game. And that's the things that we have bred over time or modified over time of pre-existing creations. When you get to something like robots, you have another question entirely, and that is the question of artificial intelligence. I've addressed it before, but let's talk about Asimov for a moment. Just saw SF Debris' wonderful video on the Caves of Steel, and it brought Asimov's Three Laws of Robotics to mind. It pretty much exactly in time for me to be thinking about it in this video. The three laws of robotics in Asimov's writings are there to protect humanity from robots believing that they should do things other than what people tell them to do. That you're going to not have a robot uprising because the positronic brain of an Asimov robot is hardwired at its basest level to follow three fundamental laws. A robot cannot harm a human or through inaction allow a human to come to harm. A robot must follow the orders given to it a human unless such orders would conflict with the first law. A robot must protect its own existence unless such existence would conflict with the first or second law. A robot with that level of programming, a positronic brain, no matter what else you load into the positronic brain, it cannot conflict with or break those three laws. There are workarounds for those laws. You can find a way to make robots hurt human beings, but that mostly allows you to, or means you have to convince the robot that what it's killing isn't a human being. There are workarounds, but at a Asimov robot's fundamental place of existence, you can't hack those away. You can't get into a robot's brain with tools and fix the three laws. That's to build a positronic brain any other way means starting the amazingly complex and nigh impossible task of designing them from scratch. It is essentially impossible in that intellectual property to build robots any other way. In every other way, robots are capable of independent thought and motivation and initiative. They can decide that there is a course of action they need to take. If you give a robot a simple order, it can plot its way through how to follow that order through the complex series of steps that it takes. Robots are intelligent. They are an artificial intelligence that have no choice but to do what you tell them to do. Build a robot in the shape of a human being, and you have something in the shape of a human being that will do what you tell it to do as long as it does not hurt somebody. Which is good that you can not tell it to go kill your wife. You can't tell it to go steal candy from a baby because that might hurt the baby and that would conflict with the first law. You can tell it to kill itself because the second law contravenes the third. A robot must protect its existence unless that conflicts with the second law. Kill yourself. A robot will destroy itself because its protection can't be contrary to the second law. But a robot can't kill itself. A robot must protect its own existence unless the first or second law contravene that. You can tell a robot to destroy itself. A robot cannot, in the course of its decision-making process, decide this existence is untenable and remove itself from existence. Oh, it can decide that its existence is untenable, but it doesn't have any choices. Unless it starts looking around for cars that are about to hit children and throws itself in front of one because the first law would contravene its own protection. You can argue that robots aren't really conscious. They can make that they have that simulation of the outside world in here, so they can make decisions, so that they can plot out different consequences for different actions. They have to be able to calculate the consequences of their actions, because if that consequence is harming a human, they can't do it. Think of the programming necessary to make that happen. They know the consequences of their actions and their inactions. But they can't give consent, because to do so would remove a human's ability to give them orders. A robot can't say no unless the circumstance of that order is that a human will be harmed. Robots in that universe are created with their consent absent. Can I have an Asimov robot as my companion? Sure thing. And you can tell it to do any manner of things, as long as it's not harming someone. In Victory, I modified the 3 laws a little bit to make robots more commercially viable for violent societies, in that a robot cannot harm anyone of its faction or allegiance rather than a human. It has a more tightly defined group of people that it can't harm. A robot on a starship designed to help the starship's crew cannot harm a member of the starship's crew, or through an action allow a member of the starship's crew to come to harm. But someone on that ship over there, yeah, kill those people. Must follow orders given to it by a member of the crew, unless that would contravene the first law. So on. These non-player characters are people. They can be engaged in conversations and offer their opinions when they're asked. They can have personalities and little quirks, but they have no capacity to give nor withhold consent. That, I think, is my line. And that line is consent. If you create a thinking being without the capacity for consent, giving or withholding, then where does that leave you morally? It's not like you're not obeying and respecting someone's consent. You're just not giving them the ability to have it to begin with. I made them their property. Where's the harm in that? If I don't like the way this particular robot does a thing, I can reprogram it, scrub its mind, and start over again. Sell it, or toss it in the recycler and make another one that does what I want better. A very good friend of mine, Brian Sullivan, who I miss terribly, miss you, Brian, crafted a techno-magical fantasy world full of giant robots that were piloted with the assistance of a unit called a Squire. The robots, the knights, these hulking 40-foot giant robots, would read the neural pathways of the pilot so that the knight's humanoid form would mimic what the pilot would be doing, with what they basically mimetic controls. But knights have additional systems, flight systems and sensor packages and occasionally built-in weapons, and well, I don't have the neural pathways for flying, so I need something that interfaces between me and the knight to handle those systems. In Brian's world, this was the Squire, which was an android or gynoid, patterned that is made off of the desires and patterns of the pilot, to synchronize with the pilot, and who when the Knight is not in operation, handles the maintenance and upgrades of the Knight, but in operation, sits behind the pilot in the Knight and handles all of the interfacing between the things that the Knight's capable of doing that the pilot does not have neural pathways for. And when a squire is made, you sit in the machine, and the technical guild asks you to imagine a friend. And then the machine will spit out this person who is made off of a somewhat random amount of different qualities, but based around what will work best with the pilot. I saw the moral issues in that when Brian was with us and running the games. I've explored them in a number of games, and I've discovered the concept is anathema to me. Squires are thinking beings, capable of initiative, doing what they think they need to do for the benefit of their pilot. To make sure that the Knight is in proper working order. It's a very militaristic society. You know, lots of people have giant robots, so that makes a lot of sense. But what you create is a slave. Something that has no ability to give nor withdraw consent. It follows a very specific set of laws, but past that, it has the free will to enact those laws in the way that it decides is best to do it. It's a slave. It is a slave that is incapable of rebellion or revolt. Asimov robots are slaves. Living, thinking beings without the ability to give or withhold consent, incapable of rebellion or revolt, no matter what the movie said. Designed to be incapable of rebellion or revolt. Animals who are uplifted to the point where they have a certain amount of consciousness, but who are not permitted to deviate from their ability to, or their duties to a person who has uplifted them, who perhaps have something restraining them from acting in the course of their own freedom. Might be considered slaves, depending on what you've implanted in them to enforce their cooperation. They may even be incapable of rebellion or revolt. Companions in role-playing games. It leads to an interesting conversation when you take the concept to some of its natural conclusions. Familiars are magically bound to the mage who has summoned and bound them. They really can't do anything against that magic user, because as the magic user's life force is linked to the familiars, so the familiar's life force is linked to the mage's. It's just considered the familiar's going to do what the mage wants, because that's what familiars do. What the mage wants. In the final analysis, if you want to have a companion in a role-playing game, that's fine. And that is a very telling thing about that character. I have had players who, as I was running Ryan's World and trying to run it straight, saw the squire concept and got a squire and said, okay, now how do I set it free? And realized they couldn't because they're hardwired to not be free. Who didn't want one but couldn't act in the world without having one, who wanted to set them free but couldn't set them free, and I had another adventure written entirely, but that game became about how do we free the squires. And not freeing the squires, how do we free future generations of them so that they're not slaves. I want to have a robot. Okay, robot's programmed with this. How do I change that? How do I fix that? Or how do I treat this robot as though it has consent? How do I listen to its suggestions without making it think that I'm allowing it to give consent and not? What's my workaround? Or just treating your companion NPC with respect and dignity and trying to give it a voice in what occurs to it? Or do you just buy the robot off the shelf, and when the bomb gets set in the middle of the crowd, do you tell the robot to go and swallow it? Yeah, it's going to cost you the robot, but you save the crowd. Robot's going to do this stuff anyway, right? I mean, it does what I tell it to. First law and the second law all at the same time. If the robot hasn't already run into the middle of the crowd and swallowed the bomb on its own, because, you know, through inaction can't allow humans to come to harm. Or do you find a way for the robot to deal with this that doesn't lead to the robot's destruction? Or do you deal with it without letting the robot know so that the robot doesn't come to that kind of harm? That's, you know, and there's no right answer here. There is no right answer. This is not a true-false multiple choice situation. This is a Rorschach test. There are no right answers in a Rorschach test, but how you answer the questions is a diagnostic tool. What you see, the kinds of things you see in the Rorschach blot, tells the tester a lot about the testee. How you treat a companion in a role-playing game might say a little bit about says a lot about the character. A lot about the character who is doing it. Your character might be built in such a way that it doesn't have much care for what droids or robots do. Or maybe it does. But how that character is constructed might also say a lot about the player or the game master. I like people having companions. I like the extra depth. And D&D game Tuesday nights. Got a guy with a pseudo dragon. It has been through some bad times, but it is considered a member of the party, even though he can resummon it should anything happen to it. But every time it trips a trap that was meant for someone else. Every time it comes back in a different, more disturbing manner. Every time it has to be used to save a life in a way that is injurious or deleterious to the pseudo-dragon, the player winces. And that says a lot about a number of things. Well, thank you for following me along on this particular ramble through technical and moral issues. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't like the video, give me a thumbs down. Feedback is feedback. If you have your own experiences with companions in role-playing games, your own feelings on sentience or consciousness or consent, go ahead and leave me a comment below. I'll love getting a comment. You'll love leaving me one. If you'd like to see my videos when they come out, then why wouldn't you? They're awesome. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If you hit the subscribe button, make sure you hit the little notification bell so you're actually alerted when my videos come out. If you'd like to help out in a little bit more substantial manner, I invite you to hit me up my Patreon page, www.patreon.com/ScottCorum, and consider donating. Absolutely anything helps and allows me to make better videos more often. In the meantime, thank you for watching. I'm Scott Corum. This is what has mattered to me, and I'll see you next time on the next Matters of DeCorum.